The world is not as straightforward as it seems. There are worlds within worlds. What I mean by that is that there are communities that operate by very different rules than we live by. Behaviors that are rewarded in a mainstream world are detrimental or even suicidal in another. Imagine a world where violence, force, and coercion rules. It's not just about being strong, but ferocious. The more violent you are, the more respect you gain in that world. The more respect you gain, the more authority and privilege you can enjoy. A person who's not strong and enters such a world better learn to become strong and violent quickly, or they will be mercilessly destroyed. You can see this world as a sort of training ground for gangsters. Unfortunately, this world is not imaginary at all. It exists right here in New York City. This is the story of Rikers Island. Rikers Island is located in the East River between Queens and the Bronx. The island is not as remote as most people think. It is actually right near the runways of LaGuardia Airport. So if you've flown into or out of LaGuardia, you went right by Rikers. Rikers Island is New York City's main jail complex and is one of the top 10 most famous prisons in the country. The complex is operated by the New York City Correctional Department with a budget of $860 million a year, a staff of 9,000 officers with 1,500 civilians, and it processes a daily population of 10,000 inmates. The majority of detainees are defendants either held on bail or remanded in custody. Here's an interesting statistic. According to the Vera Institute of Justice, it costs New York City $209,000 per year to detain a single person at Rikers. If you multiply that number by the 10,000 prisoners there, this figure becomes $2 billion a year. The financial burden this puts on a public treasury is something we will discuss later in this episode. But for now, let's take a look at how Rikers Island started, and more importantly, why is it so famous? Rikers Island is named after Abraham Ryken, a Dutch settler who moved to New York City in 1638 and took possession of the island in 1664. We can speculate as to how that possession took place. As a side note, Ryken's side gig involved rubber stamping the paperwork that allowed free blacks to be kidnapped from New York City streets and trafficked down south as slaves. Yeah, not a good start. Anyway, Ryken's descendant, the Riker family, owned the island after Abraham passed away. During the Civil War, the island was used as a training ground for Union Army regiments before heading down south to face the enemy. And between encampments, pigs were raised on the island. After the Civil War, on July 3, 1884, the city bought the island from the Riker family owners for $180,000 with the intent of building a workhouse, but nothing happened for over 30 years. By 1922, New York could no longer dump its garbage in the Atlantic Ocean due to legal environmental restraints, so Rikers was chosen as the destination place for the city's trash. The coal used from stoves and heating homes were all dumped in Rikers Island. This coal would sporadically spark small fires. The island was also plagued with rats, ferocious dogs, and pigs. An observer once noted, gases were constantly exploding through the soil, covering and bursting into flames. In the summer, the ground resembled a sea of small volcanoes, all breathing smokes and flames. This is literally the hell where Rikers Island prison complex would be built on. As New York City's population grew, so did the need for more jail cells. Construction of the 26 buildings that would make up the prison complex began in 1932. In September of that year, a steamboat called Observation, ferrying 150 construction workers to the island, exploded in the East River, killing 72 people. Investigation ensued, but construction went on regardless, which soon resulted in Rikers Island prison complex opening a few months later after a blaze of fire. Rikers Island was designed to hold 4,200 inmates, but by 1954, reports show that it held 7,900 inmates. As a response to the overcrowding, new buildings, including a floating barge, aka the boat, were added in the mid-1960s. Still, overcrowding continued to worsen. In 1969, Rikers Island held 14,000 prisoners in spaces designed for 8,000. This overcrowding, along with the complex literally sitting on top of trash, spiraled into what Rikers Island would become known for: violence. There are many reasons why Rikers has become a notorious jail. Extreme violence amongst inmates, excessive force by correctional officers, the practice of strip searches, hog-tying prisoners, the abuse of solitary confinement, aka the bang, are all part of a long list that make up the horror stories at Rikers. But for the sake of time, let's just look at a few instances. Jerome Mundoch was a homeless former Marine arrested on a misdemeanor trespassing charge for sleeping on a public staircase. He was sent to Rikers Island and shoved in a cell where equipment was malfunctioning. He literally baked to death as the room overheated and guard ignored his pleadings. City officials agreed to pay $2.25 million in settlement to his family before a lawsuit was even filed. In 2012, an inmate named Jason Cheevarria swallowed a packet of powdered detergent that had been given to inmates to clean out their cells. After swallowing the detergent, Jason began vomiting and crying from severe pain as the chemicals destroyed his internal organs. Terrence Pendergrass, the supervisor of the unit, was told of Jason's condition. The captain told the officer not to bother him unless, quote, there was a dead body, end quote. Jason was found dead the following morning. The former captain was sentenced to 5 years in prison, and Jason's family was awarded $3.8 million. There are countless similar cases at Rikers, each of them costing the state millions of dollars in settlement. For an example, a correctional officer kicked a detainee to death, resulting in him getting a 30-year sentence, and New York City giving the victim's family a $2.75 million settlement. But as bad as this may be, it is nothing compared to the violence amongst inmates. The prevailing culture is that the more violent you are, the more respect you gain. As a result, inmates are constantly trying to outdo the fatalities of other inmates. Here are some tales. 2 prisoners were trying to kill a third. The shank broke, so they put a pen in his ear and stomped on it. The pen came out of the prisoner's mouth, so he lived. We had a guy in a mental health building who everyone swore was an informant, so the other guys proceeded to beat him with a broken broomstick. They beat his face so bad that they crushed most of his bone structure and his left eye popped out. Now this may not sound so bad at first, but when I transported this guy to the hospital, every time he breathed his whole face was moving in and out because it was crushed so severely. I watched one inmate eat his cellie's liver after killing him. Another inmate threw sizzling hot water at a fellow inmate, destroying his face. I also saw an inmate that was raped so bad that he could no longer control his bowel movements. What's worse about Rikers is that many, if not most of the abuses, are not reported due to the culture of holding it down. Correctional officers routinely gang up and savagely beat inmates using radios, batons, and broomsticks. After the beating, inmates are asked to hold it down, which means not to report the violent blows and injuries they just received. Inmates who refuse to, quote, hold it down, end quote, risk retaliation from officers as well as other inmates. Here's an example. In August 2013, 4 adolescent inmates were brutally beaten by multiple officers. Based on accounts provided by the inmates, several officers assaulted the inmates, punching and kicking them, and striking them with radios, batons, and broomsticks. The beatings continued for several minutes after the inmates already had been subdued and handcuffed. The inmates were then taken to holding pens near the clinic intake, where they were beaten again by several DOC intelligence unit members, who repeatedly punched and kicked them while the inmates were handcuffed. 2 of the inmates reported that they had lost consciousness or blacked out during the incident. The officer's written statement asserts that the inmate instigated the fight and they only used force to defend themselves. The department's investigation of the incident was ongoing at the time this letter was prepared. The inmate sustained multiple injuries, including a broken nose, a perforated eardrum, head trauma, chest concussions, and concussions and injuries to the head and facial area. Plenty of big-face names have ended up in Rikers Island. American serial killer Son of Sam spent time on Rikers. So did Senator Guy Fieri, who was convicted for taking bribes to help companies get government contracts. Hip-hop star DMX, Tupac, as well as Lil Wayne spent time on Rikers, as did former managing director of the IMF, Dominique Strauss-Kahn. Most famous perhaps is Harvey Weinstein, who recently spent time on Rikers before being sent to a maximum security prison upstate New York. So what's the future of Rikers Island? In February 2016, the Lippman Commission commenced an investigation on Rikers to review the entire system. After a year of consideration, the commission released a report recommending closing the jail. Mayor Bill de Blasio did not endorse the findings of this commission, but after years of pressure, he finally released a plan for a 10-year shutdown of the facility. In 2018, the New York State Commission of Correction issued a report citing numerous facility violations and a significant increase in violent crimes at Rikers. It went on suggesting that the state might need to accelerate the 10-year closing plan to a faster deadline. In late 2019, the City Council voted for an $8 billion plan to close Rikers Island Prison by 2027 and replace it with 4 smaller borough-based jails. If things work out as planned, that will be the end of the horror story we know as Rikers. As mentioned earlier in the episode, it costs the city $209,000 to keep a single person on Rikers Island each year. The complex also has an operational cost of nearly $1 billion a year. On top of this, when you consider the several $million settlements the state has to pay each time correctional officers kill or severely injure an inmate, the true cost of running Rikers skyrockets to an unknown number. And all this for what? What's the return on investment? Well, since Rikers has a culture of violence, it is literally a school on corruption, a university for criminals of sorts. The individual leaves Rikers more violent and ruthless than he or she was before coming in. This actually makes the public more unsafe, for the prison is releasing increasingly unstable people back into society, the opposite of what prison reforms are meant to do. You may ask yourself, wait, hold up, this is a channel about secret spots. What does Rikers Island have to do with our mission? Well, my dear viewer, Rikers Island is a secret spot. A very dark one, but still a secret spot nonetheless. America has a dark underbelly. Since we don't give it enough attention, it continues to fester. But who knows, maybe one of you watching this will make sure that Rikers Island is not only closed, but other jails like it never open. See you next time.